Alright, so we're gonna go through every person Walter White killed or let die throughout Breaking Bad and figure out if it was actually necessary for his survival or if it was just Walt being a ruthless monster. And I'm not talking about morality here. I'm not asking if it was right or wrong. I'm asking from a pure survival standpoint, did Walt need to do this to stay alive and stay free, or was this just ego and cruelty? Let's go through them one by one. Krazy 8. Starting with Krazy 8, and this one is actually necessary, like genuinely necessary. So Walt and Jesse have Krazy 8 locked in Jesse's basement after their first cook goes wrong. They're trying to figure out what to do with him. And Walt, being new to this whole criminal thing, tries to convince himself that maybe they can just let him go. Maybe Krazy 8 will understand the situation and won't tell anyone. Walt even starts having these weird bonding conversations with Krazy 8 through the basement. They talk about life, about family. Walt brings him food. Walt makes this whole list of pros and cons about killing him versus letting him live. And you can see Walt desperately wants to believe he doesn't have to kill this guy because Walt's not a murderer yet. He still sees himself as a good person in a bad situation. But then Walt's cleaning up the broken plate from the food he brought, and he notices a piece is missing. A big sharp piece. And he realizes Krazy 8 has been playing him this whole time. Krazy 8 was hiding that shard, waiting for Walt to get close enough so he could stab him and escape. So Walt kills him first, strangles him with a bike lock. It's brutal and personal, and it takes forever, and Walt is literally crying while he does it. But from a survival standpoint, it was completely justified. If Walt had let Krazy 8 go, there are only two possibilities. Either Krazy 8 kills Walt right there with that plate shard the moment Walt opens the lock, or Krazy 8 goes to his connections or the police and Walt is dead or arrested within 24 hours. There's no third option where Krazy 8 just goes home and keeps quiet about the guy who kidnapped him and dissolved his cousin in acid. This is one of the few kills in the entire series that's completely justified from a pure self-defense and survival perspective. Walt had to do it. Verdict: necessary. Jane Margolis. Now we get to Jane, and this is where Walt crosses a moral line that he never really comes back from. So Jane is Jesse's girlfriend. They meet because she's the landlord's daughter at Jesse's apartment building. And at first she's good for Jesse. She's a recovering addict, she's got her life together, she's got plans and ambitions. Jesse actually seems happy with her, which is rare for Jesse, but then they both relapse. They start doing heroin together, and Jesse comes into a bunch of money from the meth operation and Jane knows about it. She's demanding Jesse get his money from Walt, and she's even kind of blackmailing Walt, saying if he doesn't give Jesse his share, she might have to talk to people about what she knows. Then one night, Walt comes to Jesse's apartment to talk to him. He's trying to get Jesse back on track, get him cooking again, and he finds Jesse and Jane both passed out from heroin. They're completely unconscious. And then Walt watches as Jane rolls onto her back in her sleep and starts choking on her own vomit. Her airway is blocked and she's dying right there. Walt could save her. He's standing right there. It would take literally 5 seconds to roll her on her side and clear her airway. That's it. That's all he'd have to do. But he doesn't. He stands there and watches her choke to death. He even takes a step toward her like he's gonna help, then stops himself. He makes a conscious decision to let her die. Now Walt might tell himself this was necessary. Jane knew about the meth operation. She was demanding money. She was a loose end who could potentially expose him. But here's the thing, none of that actually made her a real threat to Walt's survival. Jane wasn't going to go to the police. She's a recovering addict who just relapsed. The last thing she wants is cops asking questions about her substance use and who she's been hanging around with. And her plan with Jesse was to take the money and leave town, disappear somewhere and start over. She wanted out of Albuquerque, not to stick around and cause problems. The real reason Walt lets Jane die has nothing to do with her being a threat to him. It's about control over Jesse. Jane was taking Jesse away from Walt. Jesse was talking about leaving, about going to New Zealand or wherever with Jane, about getting clean and starting a new life. And Walt needed Jesse under his control. Walt needed Jesse isolated, broken, and dependent on him so he'd keep cooking. Plus, and this is important, Jesse wasn't even going to be part of Gus's operation anyway. When Walt starts working for Gus in the super lab, Gus specifically doesn't want Jesse involved. Gus thinks Jesse is a junkie and a liability. So Walt letting Jesse leave with Jane wouldn't have hurt Walt's position at all. He still would have had his job with Gus, still would have been making his money. Walt let Jane die purely to manipulate Jesse, to remove the one person who was giving Jesse hope and a reason to leave. And after Jane dies, Jesse completely falls apart, which is exactly what Walt needs. Jesse becomes this broken, guilty mess who clings to Walt as the only stable thing left in his life. From a survival necessity standpoint, Walt didn't need Jane dead. He should have saved her. This was murder by inaction for the purpose of emotional manipulation. Verdict: unnecessary. Gus's 2 henchmen: necessary. This one happens pretty fast, but it's definitely necessary in the phone note. So here's the context. Gus is using these two drug dealers who work street corners, and these dealers are using kids to sell for them, including a kid named Thomas who's maybe 10 or 11 years old. Jesse finds out about this and he's furious because Jesse has this whole thing about protecting kids. He can't stand seeing children get exploited or hurt. Then Thomas gets killed. The dealers murder this little kid because he was becoming a liability or something, and Jesse absolutely loses it. He's gonna go kill these two dealers himself to avenge this kid. He's got a gun and he's walking straight toward them ready to start shooting. The problem is these guys are connected to Gus Fring. They're part of Gus's distribution network. If Jesse kills them, it's not just going to be a street beef. Gus is going to retaliate hard. Jesse will be dead within hours, and probably Walt too by association since they're partners. Walt figures this out and realizes he's got maybe seconds to stop Jesse from committing suicide. So Walt makes this split-second decision. He gets in his Pontiac Aztek, drives straight toward the dealers and runs them both over, just plows into them at full speed, then he yells at Jesse to run. Now, were these guys a direct immediate threat to Walt in that specific moment? Not really. They weren't pointing guns at him, they weren't coming after him, but the situation was about to spiral into something that would absolutely get both Walt and Jesse killed. If Jesse had killed those dealers, Gus would have killed Jesse for disrupting his operation and disrespecting his business relationships, and Walt would have been caught in that mess too. There's no way Gus lets Walt keep cooking after his partner murders Gus's dealers. Walt's position depends on maintaining good business relationships with Gus. By killing the dealers himself, Walt at least creates a situation where he might be able to explain things to Gus, where he might be able to smooth it over or negotiate. It's damage control, it's preventing a worse outcome. Plus, once Walt committed to running them over, it's not like he could stop halfway. Either they die or they survive and immediately retaliate against Walt and Jesse. There's no version of this where Walt runs over two dealers and then everyone just goes home peacefully. It's messy and it creates huge problems with Gus that take the rest of the season to resolve. But in that moment, with Jesse about to get himself killed, this was a necessary action to save both their lives. Verdict: necessary. Gale's death is one of the most tragic in the series, but from Walt's perspective, it was absolutely necessary for survival. So Gus originally brings in Gale as Walt's assistant in the super lab. Gale is this sweet, nerdy guy who's just passionate about chemistry. He's got his libertarian philosophy about drug legalization, he loves coffee, he sings karaoke. He's probably the most innocent person in the entire meth operation. And Gale is a good chemist. Not as good as Walt, but good. And he's learning. Every day he's in that lab, he's watching what Walt does, learning Walt's process, getting better at replicating Walt's formula. Walt eventually realizes what's happening. Gus is training Gale to replace him. Once Gale can cook meth at Walt's quality level at that 99% purity, Walt becomes expendable. Gus can get rid of Walt and just use Gale, who's way easier to control and doesn't come with all of Walt's baggage and attitude problems. And it's not just speculation. Gus basically confirms this. When things get tense between Walt and Gus, when Walt becomes too much of a problem, Gus literally sends Mike to Walt to kill him. So Walt is looking at his own death, probably within hours. Gus has decided Walt needs to die and Gus has the resources to make that happen. Walt can't run because Gus has people watching him. He can't fight Gus's men directly. He's trapped. The only leverage Walt has is that he's still the only person who can cook meth at the purity Gus needs. If Walt dies, Gus's operation takes a massive hit. But that leverage disappears the moment Gale was ready to cook on his own. So Walt comes up with this desperate plan. He calls Jesse and tells him to kill Gale, because if Gale is dead, then Walt becomes essential again. Gus can't kill Walt if there's no one else who can cook the product. Is it horrible? Absolutely. Gale is a genuinely good person who doesn't deserve this. He's not evil, he's not violent, he's just a chemist who thinks he's doing a job. He answers his door thinking it's a friend, and Jesse shoots him in the face. But from Walt's survival standpoint, it was kill Gale or die himself. There's no middle option. If Gale lives, Gus kills Walt that night. It's that simple. Walt had to eliminate the person who was replacing him or accept his own death. You could argue Walt created this situation through his own actions, through being difficult and arrogant with Gus. And that's fair, but in the moment, with killers coming for him, killing Gale was the only move that kept him alive. Verdict: necessary. Gustavo Fring: necessary. Killing Gus is absolutely necessary, and honestly, it's kind of incredible that Walt manages to pull it off. So after Gale's death, Walt thinks maybe things will stabilize. He made himself essential, so Gus needs to keep him alive to maintain the meth operation. And for a while, there's this tense truce where they're working together, but everyone knows it's temporary. But Gus is playing the long game. He's working on turning Jesse against Walt, treating Jesse with respect and responsibility, making Jesse loyal to Gus instead of Walt. And once Gus has Jesse fully on his side and Jesse can cook at the quality Gus needs, Walt becomes expendable again. Walt figures this out. He sees what Gus is doing, and he knows that eventually, maybe in months or maybe in weeks, Gus is going to kill him. Walt tries to leave. He packs up his family, gets them ready to run, but Gus has people watching his house, and also Skylar gave away his money to Ted. Walt is being monitored constantly. If he tries to disappear, Gus's people will find him. There's no running from someone with Gus's resources and connections, so Walt realizes he can't run and he can't negotiate. The only option left is to kill Gus before Gus kills him. And that's nearly impossible because Gus is incredibly careful. He's paranoid about security, he's got guards, he changes his routines, he's survived the cartel for years, specifically because he's good at staying alive. Walt eventually comes up with this elaborate plan involving Hector Salamanca, the one person who hates Gus enough to help kill him. Walt rigs a bomb to Hector's wheelchair and uses Hector as bait to get Gus into a room where the bomb can kill him. And it works. Barely. Gus is suspicious, he almost doesn't fall for it, but eventually Hector triggers the bomb and Gus gets half his face blown off. This is pure survival. As long as Gus is alive, Walt is living on borrowed time. Gus is one of the most dangerous people in the Southwest. He's got trained killers, he's got connections with the cartel, he's got legitimate business fronts that make him untouchable legally. The only way Walt survives is if Gus is dead. There's no scenario where Walt and Gus both stay alive and Walt gets to keep living his life. Gus had already decided Walt needed to die. This was self-defense, just with more planning involved. Verdict: necessary. Mike Ehrmantraut: unnecessary. This is one of Walt's worst and most pointless kills. Mike's death is completely unnecessary and it's purely about Walt's hurt ego. So after Gus is dead, Walt, Jesse and Mike are trying to wind down the operation and get out clean. They're dissolving the business, destroying evidence, trying to make sure no one can connect them to Gus's meth empire. But there's a problem. Mike has 9 guys in prison. These are people who worked for Gus, people who know things, people who might talk to save themselves now that Gus is dead. Mike's been paying them to keep quiet, taking care of their families, keeping them loyal. Walt is paranoid about these 9 guys. He wants their names so he can have them killed before they can talk. Mike refuses because these are his people, guys he's known for years, and he's not going to give Walt a hit list. So Mike decides he's done. He's leaving. He's going to take his granddaughter's money, disappear, and never come back. He's wounded from a shootout with the DEA earlier, but he's mobile enough to grab his go bag and get out of town. And then Walt shows up. Walt wants to talk, wants to argue about the 9 guys, wants Mike to see things his way. And Mike, who's in pain and exhausted and just completely done with Walt's nonsense, tells him exactly what he thinks. Mike says that everything was working fine with Gus. They had a professional operation, everyone was making money, things were smooth, and then Walt came along with his pride and his ego and ruined it for everybody. He basically tells Walt that Walt's the problem, that Walt's been the problem all along, and Walt can't handle it. His ego can't take being criticized like that, so he pulls out a gun and shoots Mike, just kills him right there out of anger. Then, and this is what makes it so pointless, literally 30 seconds after Mike is dying, Walt has this realization. He goes, "Oh, I just remembered, I could have gotten the names from Lydia, because Lydia has the same list of names Walt wanted from Mike." Walt didn't need to talk to Mike at all. He didn't need those names from Mike. He murdered a man for absolutely no reason other than that man hurt his feelings by telling him the truth about himself. From a survival standpoint, Mike wasn't a threat. Mike was leaving. Mike was going to disappear and never come back. Mike wasn't going to talk to the DEA because that's not who Mike is. Mike's a professional who keeps his mouth shut. Walt's survival didn't depend on Mike dying. This was pure ego. Walt killed Mike because Mike saw through all of Walt's justifications and rationalizations and called him out for being an egomaniacal cancer on everyone around him. And Walt couldn't stand hearing that truth. Mike's imprisoned men. Unnecessary. After killing Mike, Walt goes ahead with having all 9 of Mike's guys killed in prison. And this is also unnecessary, just on a larger scale. Walt's reasoning is that these guys might flip. They might make deals with the DEA to reduce their sentences. They know things about Gus's operation, and by extension, they might know things that could lead back to Walt. So Walt decides the safest move is to eliminate them all. He gets Todd's uncle Jack involved. Jack's crew coordinates with people inside multiple prisons, and they kill all 9 men within a 2-minute window. It's this massive orchestrated hit that happens simultaneously across different facilities. But here's the thing. These guys weren't talking. Mike had been taking care of them, paying them regularly, supporting their families on the outside. That was the arrangement and it was working. These guys were holding up their end of the deal. None of them had flipped, none of them had shown any signs of cooperating with law enforcement. Walt could have just continued Mike's arrangement. Keep paying them, keep their families taken care of, and they stay quiet. That system was already in place and functioning, but Walt doesn't trust them. Or maybe Walt doesn't want the ongoing expense and complication. Or maybe Walt just defaults to the most extreme solution because that's who he's become at this point, so he has them all killed. These are preemptive murders based on what might possibly happen, not what was actually happening. These guys weren't an immediate threat. They weren't actively cooperating with investigators. They were potential future problems that could have been managed in ways that didn't involve mass murder. From a pure survival necessity standpoint, this wasn't required. Walt chose murder because it was simpler and more permanent than actually managing the situation. But necessary? Number. Verdict: unnecessary. Jack Welker and his gang, necessary. At the very end of the series, Walt comes back from hiding in New Hampshire to kill Jack's neo-Nazi gang. And yeah, this one's necessary. So Jack and his crew are the ones who killed Hank. They're the ones who stole almost all of Walt's money, leaving him with just 1 barrel out of 7. And most importantly, they're keeping Jesse as a slave, forcing him to cook meth in captivity. Now, from a pure self-interest survival standpoint, Walt could maybe just stay hidden. He's dying of cancer anyway. He's got maybe weeks left to live. He could just wait it out in New Hampshire and let the cancer finish him off. But Jack's gang represents an ongoing threat to Walt's family. They know who Walt is, they know about Skylar and the kids. They've got no loyalty to Walt and no reason to keep his family safe. As long as they're alive and operating, they're a loose end that could potentially come back and hurt Skylar or Walt Jr. or Holly. So Walt builds this automated machine gun contraption in his car trunk and goes to Jack's compound. He gets them all in one room and triggers the gun, killing everyone except Todd, who Jesse strangles, and Jack, who Walt shoots personally. Is this partly about ego and revenge? Probably. Walt's angry about Hank, angry about his money being stolen, angry about being disrespected. But it's also genuinely necessary from a protection standpoint. Jack's gang needs to be eliminated to secure Walt's family's safety and to free Jesse. Walt's dying anyway, so he's got nothing to lose. Might as well tie up this last dangerous loose end before the cancer takes him. Verdict: necessary. Lydia: necessary. The last person Walt kills is Lydia, and from his perspective, this is necessary for his family's protection. So Lydia is this businesswoman who was involved in Gus's operation on the logistics and distribution side. After Gus dies, she ends up working with Todd and Jack's crew, helping them sell the meth that Jesse's cooking while enslaved. Lydia is one of the very few people left alive who knows Walt's real identity and his role in the meth empire. She knows about Heisenberg. She's been in meetings where Walt's name came up. She could potentially expose Walt or his family if she decided to make a deal with law enforcement or if someone pressured her. More importantly, Lydia is still actively in the game. She's not trying to get out, she's not lying low. She's running the distribution network for Todd's operation. As long as she's operating in the meth business, she's a risk to Walt's family even after Walt is dead. So Walt poisons her with ricin. He puts it in the stevia she uses for her tea during a meeting at a coffee shop. It's cold and calculated. Lydia doesn't even know she's been poisoned until Walt calls her later and tells her. From a protection standpoint, this makes sense for Walt. Lydia is a loose end who could potentially hurt Skylar or the kids after Walt's gone. She knows too much and she's too connected to the criminal world. By killing her, Walt eliminates one more person who could bring consequences down on his family. Is it ruthless? Absolutely, but from Walt's perspective of protecting his family after his death, it's a logical move. Lydia had to die to ensure the story ends with Walt. Verdict: necessary, the final count. So if we tally this up, Walt's kills break down into 2 categories. The necessary ones: Krazy 8, Gus's 2 henchmen, Gale, Gus, Jack's gang, and Lydia. These were situations where Walt was genuinely threatened or where leaving people alive would directly endanger him or his family. You can argue Walt created some of these situations through his own bad decisions, but in the moment, these kills were about survival. The unnecessary ones: Jane, Mike, and Mike's 9 guys. These were kills that served Walt's purposes but weren't actually required for survival. Jane was about controlling Jesse through emotional manipulation. Mike was about ego and pride. The 9 guys were about eliminating potential future problems that weren't actually materializing yet. That's 3 unnecessary kills out of 9, or if you count the 9 imprisoned men individually, it's 12 unnecessary versus 7 necessary. Either way, a significant chunk of Walt's body count was about something other than pure survival. And that's what makes Walter White such a complex and ultimately tragic character. He's not just doing what's necessary to stay alive, he's making choices based on ego, control, pride, and manipulation. He tells himself every action is forced on him by circumstances, but that's not true. Walt has agency, he makes decisions, and sometimes those decisions are about maintaining power and control rather than survival. The difference between Walt and someone like Gus or Mike is that they kill when it's actually necessary for business or protection. They're ruthless but strategic. Walt kills when it's necessary and when it serves his ego or emotional needs. That extra category of unnecessary kills is what separates a criminal from a monster. Alright, let me know in the comments if you disagree with any of these verdicts. I know some people might argue Jane was necessary or that Mike's guys were actually a threat. The beauty of Breaking Bad is that almost every decision has layers and can be interpreted different ways depending on how you view Walt's motivations.